deem it a privilege to introduce the speaker of today, Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan, to the audience. But how does one introduce a person about whom everybody knows a lot? That's a difficult task. A person is defined not by the material acquisitions or the intellectual accomplishments that he has, but by how he puts them to use in times of difficulties, when faced with a go or no-go situation, or faced with a do or die situation. So, by this yardstick, I feel that Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan is a personification of clarity of mind, of competence, of courage, of conviction, of confidence, and character. Many C's, sir, you should bear with me when I go into details about you, because we have a lot of students who I feel will be inspired by your life story. Dr. Garu was born in Maharashtra to parents of modest background. Doctor's father was in the railways and his mother was a homemaker. He was born there, and by virtue of his father's profession, I presume he traveled to many places, but the early part of his childhood he spent in Guntur and Vijayawada. Dr. Garu took his medical degree, MBBS, from Guntur Medical College. But soon after that, at the age of 24, he quickly became an IAS officer, which means that he was preparing for it for a long time. And to top it all, he secured the 4th rank in All India in the UPSC examination. That, my dear friends, should be an inspiration to you all. Coming from a background which doesn't offer the luxuries of life, and still being able to make it to one of the top services in the country, and also securing the highest rank, one of the top 5 ranks, is a great achievement. So this I see as a sign of the clarity of mind. He must have pursued it right from the beginning. Otherwise, to be able to become an IAS officer at the age of 24, that too, after pursuing a medical degree. See, if it was a lighter degree like arts or commerce, it would have been understandable. But pursuing medicine, MBBS, and again becoming an IAS officer is something that is remarkable. He had clarity of mind. Then, of course, competence. That is what brought him to where he was in the beginning. Then, after a short span of 16 years of service, the sir held all the positions, the traditional positions of sub-collector, collector, assistant collector, collector, and so on, and rose to become a team every now and then. But the entire process of governance needs to be thoroughly overhauled. And with that, HITEX city, and HITEX was going to be inaugurated in 1998, the Cyber Towers building. Dr. Garu left the service of the government in 1996 after 16 years of service in IAS. Now, to leave a prime service like that at the prime of your life requires a lot of courage. Conviction is one thing, saying that yes, this is what needs to be done, but to be able to jump in and do that requires a lot of courage, and that's why I described that he is a personification of courage as well. Having left the service, then he formed the Lok Sabha Party and also the Foundation for Democratic Reforms, FDR, and he serves currently as its General Secretary. Then he also is the National Advisor for India's Future Foundation. Then there is a program called Youth Parliament Program, where it's an ideal platform for socially conscious youth to express their views, ideas, and to act as change agents in the national building process. The sir has held several positions, and then he formed the Lok Sabha Party. And he had the confidence to be able to go out and seek the mandate of the people, and he won the election from Kukatpalli constituency as member of the Legislative Assembly. So stepping off from the comfortable positions of senior bureaucrats, he has come into the life where he has to go out and seek the mandate of people, walking from door to door, going from street to street. So this is again an inspiration to our students, up and coming students, student leaders from both Vanita and Polytechnic College from these grounds, and also from the other colleges, Kasturba College, Sardar Patel College, and so on, from outside of the exhibition grounds. Now, the list of accomplishments of Dr. Garu are it's a very long one. But some of the things that he has brought into place is the Right to Information Act 2005 was solely at his behest and initiative. Like that, there are several social reforms that have been brought into place. What is the highlight of Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan's ability is that he is able to analyze things critically and clinically and make recommendations unambiguously and directly. So this is what has driven us to seek him out and request him to come and deliver his talk. Because today we hope that he will be able to analyze what ails our economy, why there is disparity, and give us his recommendations in unambiguous and direct terms as to what could be the mitigation measures. Thank you very much, sir. Sir, please. I request our speaker for the day to take over and give us his address.
Thank you. English or Telugu?
English.
Youngsters, what do they want?
English.
Okay. Friends, first of all, thank you for your kindness and warmth and hospitality. I'm overwhelmed by that. Aditya has been extraordinarily kind, said a lot of nice things. Don't worry too much about that. I'm a great fan of the Usmania Graduates Association. I've said it umpteen number of times. In a country where people fragment, don't unite, find reasons why they should have factions. OGA and Andhra Mahila Sabha in Hyderabad are the two symbols of perseverance, service, and collective endeavor. And I deeply appreciate the work OGA has been doing for the past 1930. I was reflecting on the year 1932, a very significant year in many ways. That was the year in which Francis MacDonald, the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, announced the MacDonald Award, basically a communal award, not only for the separate electorate of Muslims, but also a separate electorate on the basis of the caste. That's what led to Mahatma Gandhi's fast unto death, and therefore the Pune Pact. Some kind of a compromise. An affirmative action policy of reservation was accepted. Instead of treating the Dalits as a separate electorate and choosing their own representatives, and casting those choosing their own representatives. And for an organization to sustain the spirit of nationalism and public service and collective enterprise for 93 years is quite remarkable. So I salute you for this wonderful work. And I thank the Economic Committee for giving me this opportunity to interact. I wanted to make it very, very interactive rather than didactic and in terms of a lecture. So in between, I'll try and make it interactive rather than give a boring lecture. I've come to the conclusion that people don't want lectures. Lectures are boring. Most often they lack substance. They lack cohesion. As somebody said, lectures are like, speeches are like bulls. Steer horns, a lot of bull in between there. They're absolutely irrelevant. They go over the heads of people. But if you stimulate people to think, if you allow them to participate, hopefully the young people will imbibe some ideas based on evidence and logic. And then they'll make a difference for the future of the country. So let's straight away jump into the theme. Why should we bother about inequality? And is there inequality in India? Let's address these two questions. They appear to be self-evident, but some clarity will certainly help. First about, is there inequality? Dr. Gangadhar talked about 80 crore, 800 million plus people getting free food grains and the paradox of it. Some of it is exaggeration. We don't have 80 crore people starving in India. It's politics. It's the necessity of appeasing the voters in order to get the electoral outcome. So we should not judge ourselves by those numbers. I keep hearing these numbers. They're more political polemics rather than substantive issues of criticism. A few numbers. Abject poverty defined as something like $2 plus, a little over $2 per day income, has now come down to almost zero level. We are now at 1%. It's a remarkable accomplishment. That means for the basic, bare necessities of survival, 99% of families are okay now. 1% still are there. No, extreme poverty for a variety of reasons. 1% are there, but there's no country with 0%. So, while you should eliminate even that 1%, it's not too bad. And Dr. Gangadhar also talked about the UPI numbers. The fact that technology is now reaching the people, the poorest of the people, the most remote areas, and things that were unbelievably difficult to access 30, 40 years ago are now available to most of the people, most of the time, is a remarkable accomplishment. I remember my first visit abroad was to the Netherlands. Then on my way back to India, I went to Britain. I think I had a series of back-to-back meetings in London. And a Lebanese chauffeur, a person of Lebanese origin, Salim, used to drive me around. And I had lots of meetings in central London where parking place was very difficult. So I was worried about meeting the next appointment. How will I get my car in time and where will he park and all that? He said, sir, don't worry about it. I have a mobile phone. I'll park somewhere convenient. After your meeting is over, just call me from a landline. I'll come in a minute or two. I was filled with both wonder and envy at the same time. Wonder because life has become so much more convenient. A chauffeur has it, and therefore, as a user of that, I am a beneficiary. How comfortable, how stress-free life has become. Envy because in a country where to get a telephone, a landline telephone, was an excruciatingly difficult and prolonged process. When will my country get these things? Well, within the next 10 years or so, or 12 years or so, we did get telephones. We have now 1 billion telephones in the country. Digital technology has now spread far and wide. India is now a model for the world in terms of digital transfers of money and digital welfare system. Television, I remember the first television program that I watched in 1982 in India. Asiad finals were going on. India-Pakistan hockey final tournament was there, so we all wanted to watch it. All of us officials from Vizag, about 7, 8 officials, they came down to my place, Narsipatnam. We had lunch there, and from there too, we went to Kakinada. Why Kakinada? In the then Andhra Pradesh, only Hyderabad had TV. Kakinada had TV because the MP from Kakinada was the minister in charge of electronics, Mr. Sanjeeva Rao. Of course, by the time we reached Kakinada, India lost 7-0. It was one of the most disappointing matches. But today, electricity, even 10, 15 years ago, electricity was a rare luxury outside a big city. 24-hour power was not available anywhere except in Gujarat. But now, most parts of India, Telangana is a great example, we have electricity practically everywhere, most of the time, occasional slippages maybe. So telephone, television, electricity, digital technology, remarkable strides. And ordinary people's lives have become extremely more very productive, no question about it. When I see in the KBR Park at the morning walks, the hawkers getting payment through UPI. My wife was telling me one person was buying one banana and made the transfer of that 5 rupees or whatever. Somebody told me even more amusing thing. At the Panjagutta Chaurasta, there was a beggar seeking alms. And usually when we want to avoid, you say there's no change, right? Promptly, the beggar produced a QR code and said you can transfer money. Real story. Real story. So we don't have abject poverty any longer. But it's not enough for us to be satisfied. Abject poverty is defined as only 2,500 calories consumption per day. And in a warm country where the weather gods are very kind, unlike say right now you go to Europe or America, you'll die if you don't have proper housing and heating. In India, that's not a problem at all. So life is much more easy in many ways. But we need much more. That's the context in which we're talking. So why bother about, I'm sorry. So why bother about inequality? Is it important? Let me make a broader proposition. The traditional socialists believe there must be equality in every sense. It's an absurd notion which has spectacularly failed. You have seen the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fall of Berlin Wall. When we were youngsters in colleges, the debates, the discussions were socialism versus market economy, or Gandhism, and all kinds of things. I think by now we realize the notion that everybody will have equal income, no matter what, is a very silly idea which ultimately diminishes productivity, distort the incentives, and destroys societies. If you notice, the societies that lived longer in that kind of a regime are finding it harder to come out of that mess. Take Eastern Europe, countries like Poland, etc. After they have come out of the Soviet hegemony, after 1991, there's been significant dynamism in their economies. But Soviet Union itself, erstwhile Soviet Union or Russian Federation now, despite all the technological and educational advantages and resource advantages, they're finding it harder because 70 plus years of socialist mindset, which destroyed the individual initiative, an idea of competition, innovation, and choice, has made it very difficult for the people to come out of that rut. So socialism and its inequality is simply not possible, perhaps not even desirable. Because even in a family, even if you give identical opportunities to brothers and sisters, even if you share whatever the parents have equally, and that's what happens typically in India, you see a remarkable difference over a lifetime, depending on your aptitude, your talent, the passion you have, the hard work you put in, and sometimes perhaps even the opportunity and the fortune. If that is the case, to envisage a world where everybody will be economically equal is not a very realistic one. We require definitely economic freedom, competition, and choice. That's what essentially market economy is, provided you handle it properly, and the state system which works fair for everybody. I think the bargain that we have is in a market economy of economic freedom and enterprise, the tide rises. The bottom will be always much better than what it would be otherwise. Everybody will have a decent quality of life, but there will be definite inequalities. And inequalities perhaps even rise. So I'm not worried too much about inequalities rising. I don't agree with people like Thomas Piketty and others who talk about, the inequalities, my God, the world is collapsing. The evidence does not point to that. But what is problematic is if the bulk of the people are not able to fulfill their potential and therefore are not able to play a meaningful part in the productive activities of the country, the economic activities of the country, then we have a crisis. We have a crisis which is political, which is economic, which is social. I want you all to reflect on this. Now, let's take politics. Not party politics, but larger political trajectories. Take the Telangana Assembly election. It was not an accident that in 24 assembly constituencies in and around Hyderabad city, Congress lost every single seat. And in the rest of the state, Congress won predominantly. What's the difference? Where growth touched the bulk of the people, people felt a sense of hope that their future would be better. irrespective of their own caste, creed, other things. They were voting for a pro-growth orientation. Because growth demands a short-term sacrifice for the long-term good. What our parents do, what our families do, Hindu, Muslim, upper caste, lower caste, Andhra, Telangana, all our families are examples. Just look at your own families 30, 40 years ago. What have been the circumstances? There is not one family which can say we're not better off today than we were 30, 40 years ago. Because our parents are sacrificing. You as parents are sacrificing. You are saving money. And you are indulging in short-term pain if necessary to protect the long-term gain for our children. But if there is no hope for the bulk of the people, as the rest of Telangana outside of Hyderabad demonstrated, they will vote for short-term gain because they don't see the long-term. If you don't understand it, forget the morality of it. Just understand the politics of it and the economics of it. We have to create an opportunity for everybody. You may say, how does it matter? We are growing. Probably even if we do some terrible things or foolish things, we'll grow at 4 or 5%. 4 or 5% is not a small amount of growth, but it's not enough. For the young people here, does anybody have an idea of what was the growth rate during Industrial Revolution? Anybody just shout? What percentage? Give a number. Make a guess. There's no test here. The growth rate during Industrial Revolution, that period was 1760 to 1840. Historians say that 80-year period was roughly the Industrial Revolution in Britain. So what was the economic growth rate then? Anybody? Young people. Make a guess. Participate. Don't slip off. 32%. Anybody else? 10 to 12%. 50%. The economy in Britain grew at the time by 1 to 2% per annum. It was a revolution because for 10,000 years in an agrarian economy, there was no growth. Because in agriculture, whether gods are kind, you have good production, you have enough to eat. Whether gods are unkind, you starve to death. There was only some fluctuation, but there's no long-term growth. In that backdrop, for the first time in human history, irrespective of the elements of weather, we could record sustained growth rates over a long-term period. If today we have 5% or 4% growth rate, we'll bring down the governments. We'll give them quite rightly galleys. But 1 to 2% was still a revolution at that time. So sustained long-term growth, some countries achieved even more. South Korea for some period, China for some period, Taiwan for some period, even Japan for some period, they achieved 8 to 10%. Now you may say, what's wrong? 5% is still good. Let me give you some numbers. Let's assume India grows at 5%. That's about the lowest growth we can manage for the next 20 years, short of war or pandemics. Versus, let's assume 8% growth rate. In about 9 years' time, the difference between 5% growth rate and 8% growth rate in the country is an annual production of $1.8 trillion. That is more than 150 or 160 trillion rupees. That is 150 lakh crores per annum. That means a per capita income loss, per capita loss of 1 lakh rupees per year. Straightforward. We have to choose. You want a 5% growth rate or 8% growth rate? If you want to forego 1 lakh rupees per capita income and continuously wallow in self-pity, it's our choice as a country. But the difference is 1 lakh rupees per capita. Every person, man, woman, child. That also means a loss of 30 lakh crores income to the governments, because today our governments are collecting about 19-20% of our total production, GDP, as the taxes, tax GDP ratio as they call it. So 30 lakh crores loss, which could have been utilized for infrastructure, welfare, investment for the future. So growth versus no growth, or high growth versus low growth, High growth leads you to a virtuous cycle, a continuous improvement of quality of life and further growth and prosperity. Moderate or low growth, a vicious cycle. More expenditure, more demands, less resources, fewer resources, and therefore you get into a negative cycle. Please understand this. Not only is it politically problematic, it is socially unrealistic. Because 40, 50 years ago, when there was no television, no exposure to what's happening in the rest of the world, people accepted their lot as fate, kismat. Today, from films and TV and social media, they know what is possible. They know it's beyond their reach. People will not be quiet. We are a remarkably lucky society. Despite all the problems, we are one of the most peaceful societies on earth. We are all sitting here discussing in a very civilized manner. We don't realistically expect a group of gundas to come in with the lathis and guns and knives and attack us or something. We're not worried at all. After this meeting is over, we all assume that we'll go back safely. There's no real problem. Our society is still very strong because our family values are strong, irrespective of religion. Our sense of right and wrong is strong. Our collective approval or disapproval of conduct is very strong. That is what is holding us together, not law, not the policemen, not the courts. But this will not last forever. Already you can see certain breakdown. As urbanization takes place inevitably, because in modern world, urbanization, modernization, prosperity, they go together. I grew up in a village. But to have a romantic notion of a village is not really useful. We have to create a framework in which everybody has a better life. But with urbanization, what happens? Lives become impersonal. Very many of us who live in apartments, we don't even know our neighbor. They are. With lives becoming impersonal, social controls become weak. So our behavior is no longer regulated by what society thinks of us. We don't care. So you can no longer control human behavior by social controls in the absence of state controls, because we have a very weak state structure, ineffective state structure. So it will lead to chaos, violence, mayhem. Even now, we're increasingly afraid if a girl goes out to the city, if she doesn't come back, let's say before 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the night, we're very worried, right? You make so many phone calls and you say, please don't get into any vehicle as you please. I'll come and pick you up if necessary, and we take all precautions. It's going to get worse. So we need it. We need to create an opportunity for everybody. And our society has certain. I'm a great supporter of Indian society. I'm very proud of our society and culture. I'm a great optimist, one of the greatest optimists in this country. But this optimism is not an unvarnished one, not an uncritical one. If you don't look at the reality, you're simply optimistic. It's not optimism, it's romanticism. You must look at the reality, look at the possibilities, be optimistic, and make the reality change for the better. One of the negatives of our society, where there are so many positives, is our moral neutrality to inequality by birth. We somehow think it's normal, it's natural, that's the way God created. We are kind to people, we make sure that they have good food or clothing, but it never occurs to us that the servant's maid's child, who is as bright as my child, probably deserves a good education to fulfill her potential. It's not, somehow, we don't even think about it as a part of our culture. That's one of our great weaknesses as a society. But that cannot continue. We have to harness human potential. And you cannot get high growth rates if only 10-20% fulfill their potential. The rest simply will not be able to participate in the market activities, in productive activities meaningfully, and therefore growth will always be stunted. So we have to look at inequalities. Not for perfect equality, but a reasonable equality of opportunity to give them skills and employment and decent incomes, and a confidence that if they work hard, if they have skills, if they contribute to society, A, they can contribute to society, B, they will be rewarded. And C, in a generation's time, the poor can become middle class can become rich. Poverty in itself is not a problem. Hopelessness is the real problem. Nobody who came from poverty ever complained about poverty. In fact, they take pride that I am a self-made person. I worked hard. And this society gave me so much of opportunity. I made something of myself. But if that making something of yourself is not possible, that is a tragedy. So that's the context in which I'm speaking. So what do we do? Before I go into specifics, I'll very briefly outline the few things, tangible things we need to do and why. But before that, let me mention 3 numbers. I want every young person, I want every serious Indian to look at these 3 numbers and understand what it means. Because any one number is unique, is quite extraordinary. India is exceptional in having all these 3 numbers. No other country has these 3 numbers. Number 1, 90% plus workers in India are in the unorganized sector without a monthly secure wage. Just imagine. You don't know where the next month's income is going to come. There's no security. You're always on the margins of survival. 90% unorganized sector. No country, no significant country in the world has this. Maybe Afghanistan, but that's not the comparison, right? Take G20, or take G40 if you like, take G50 if you like. None of them have this number. 90%. Actually, some economists say 93%, but let's round it off to 85, 90%. That number itself should keep us awake at nights. The second number, 65% of our people are still rural. We are saying that we are urbanizing. No, our urbanization is one of the slowest in the world. Ours is the lowest urbanization in all G20 countries, maybe G40, G50 countries. In a world where urbanization, modernization, and prosperity and economic growth go together, low urbanization means we are condemning ourselves to low levels of income. No country is anywhere near that. 65% rural. And even the urbanization that is going on is big city urbanization as opposed to in situ urbanization. I'll come to it later. The third number, even now, 46% of our families, 46% of the people depend on agriculture as a primary source of livelihood. It used to be 41% until 2021 or so, 2019 or so. Post-COVID, it now became actually 46. The other day, when I had a long discussion with the Finance Commission, I pointed out this number 41. Then Dr. Panagaria said, Jayaprakash, now it's 46%. It has actually grown, this number. 46%. Rest of the world is at 20, countries like China, 3% United States and Britain, or much of Europe. Some other countries 8-9%, but nobody has got 46%. And remember, agriculture share of GDP is only about 17-16%, and it's falling every year. Just understand the implications of these 3 numbers: 90% unorganized sector, 65% still rural, 46% dependent on agriculture as the primary source of livelihood. Always remember them. When you look at India, when you think of India, remember these 3 numbers. And until that is altered, our pretense that we are changing India is not really borne by evidence. It's largely a pretense. So what do we do? 5 very simple, straightforward points. Maybe a 6th addendum. Very quickly, each one I'll take you through a couple of minutes. Later in the discussion, we can go into detail. Each one requires a detail. You can have a whole workshop for 3 days only on one of these items. So I will compress everything into 10 minutes so that we have time for interaction. The first is, if the government finances are not in a sound condition, we're going to create a disaster for ourselves. And many governments, what are they doing? Instead of protecting the future, which is what every family does, which is what made humanity what it is today, they are devouring the future. We are destroying our children's future. If you borrow recklessly for current expenditure without creating an asset for the future,
without enhancing the income earning capacity of our children, that family is ruined, right? That's what exactly most of our governments are doing most of the time. We're in a desperate situation. Some states are terrible. Some states are doing better. We have to fix this. There are states where the minimum expenditure over which they have no control. They cannot, no chief minister, no party can change it. Your salaries, your pensions, interest payments, you have zero flexibility, inflexible expenditure. There are states where these three are exceeding the state's total own revenues. If 100 rupees is the revenue, some states is going to 120, 130 rupees. These three, I'm not talking about welfare, I'm not talking administrative expenditure, transport, nothing. Just these three.
For us to have an idea, please specific on the states, sir.
The worst states right now are Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh is the worst. Last 5 years, it made havoc with the AP economy. Otherwise, they have some problems, but it was destructive completely. Punjab, terrible state. Himachal Pradesh, but Himachal is a special category state, small state, therefore probably we can overcome that without too much difficulty. To a large extent, the state of Rajasthan, to some extent, not as bad. West Bengal and Kerala.
Fortunate Telangana is not included.
The reason is, it's a good question. The reason is not because we are great people. This is the only state, a small state relatively, with a large city. So a state with a large city, particularly a small state with a large city, has a unique advantage. We are doing our best to undermine the economy of the state, but we have not destroyed Hyderabad. Successive parties, successive governments, combined Andhra Pradesh and post-Telangana formation, there are many things wrong, but they at least protected Hyderabad city's productive capacity. But Telangana is working very hard to undermine itself. When the state was formed, we had the largest surplus in the country. The revenues versus the expenditure that you have to incur, which is the revenue expenditure as we call it. We had 1,16,000 crore surplus was estimated in a period of 5 years by the 14th Finance Commission. Today, we have 30 to 40,000 crore deficit per annum. But we can still survive, not comfortably, not very well, thanks to Hyderabad. Another state which is doing like Telangana, which has tremendous opportunity but is working very hard to undermine itself, is Tamil Nadu. Chennai city, cash cow, because cities generally give enormous revenues to the coffers and they produce economic growth, jobs and so on and so forth. The states which are utilizing the advantage so far, but now that some of them are slipping, Karnataka. Relatively more robust financial management, but now with too many guarantees, for the first time they're getting into some difficulty, but they're better off still. Maharashtra is doing very well in general. And the states which are doing surprisingly well are three right now. Uttar Pradesh, 78,000 crore revenue surplus. Total revenues versus total revenue expenditure, not capital expenditure, not investment, there is 78,000 crore surplus. So that plus borrowings will go towards investment for the future, provided you invest wisely, not like your Kaleshwaram project or something. The other state which was always backward, known to be backward, Orissa, 38,000 crore annual revenue surplus. Gujarat always has been very prudent state because Gujarati society is very prudent. They are thrifty, they don't waste too much money on stupid things. The Gujaratis have a very special culture, some positives. So Gujarat always has been a very healthy state. These three, particularly Gujarat and Orissa, where UP is doing very well, but there are larger problems. It's a poor state with problems. Gujarat and Orissa are doing well. So these are the good states. States that could be in good shape but are working hard to not be so good, like Telangana and Tamil Nadu. States which are bad, I gave you. Others are somewhere in between. But the broader point I'm making is, you see the last 4 or 5 assembly elections in the country. Telangana, Karnataka, you had Haryana, Maharashtra. What were the dominant themes in these elections? So I'm not opposed to welfare. Welfare is necessary. There is no way you can carry people with you. There's no way you can give minimum sense of dignity in abject poverty without some degree of welfare. But if welfare becomes a philosophy, it's all welfare and nothing else, then it's a disaster. So let's have some basic rules. One, you do whatever you like with the resources that you have, but you cannot borrow for the current expenditure. You figure out how you manage it. Borrowed money must go towards building assets. If you are smart, you must have actually some surplus, as we all save money, and then build the future. But anyway, that may be difficult, all right, but at least you cannot use borrowed money for today's expenditure. It's possible. There are other things, technical stuff. The constitution makers were very wise. They made a provision for all those things. There is Article 293, by which the state's finances have to be managed or have to be directed by the union government, because, as the Constituent Assembly argued, there is only one country in terms of financial stability and the credit of India. Telangana or Andhra Pradesh cannot go bankrupt in isolation. India will go bankrupt. That's the way our structure is designed. Therefore, they gave the responsibility to the federal government in India, the union government. But though it's not germane to what I'm discussing here, we keep hearing every other day some critiques saying government of India is not giving money. I want to give you numbers, actual hard numbers. This year or next year, 25-26 budget, out of the total revenues, tax and non-tax revenues put together of Government of India, 54.6% is going to states. The current year, roughly the same thing. 54.6%. Conveniently, political parties and sometimes states are taking a number here, a number there without looking at the totality. Resources go to states in many ways. One is the Finance Commission, devolution, about 41% or 42% of the total divisible pool of the union government. The second is the Finance Commission grants, which are beyond this, local government and some other grants. The third is what are called centrally sponsored schemes. There's a huge chunk goes in the form of centrally sponsored schemes. The fourth is certain statutory programs like Employment Guarantee Act. The fifth is what recently has been started 2 years ago. A significant money given practically as free money, but as a 50-year zero interest loan. Anybody gives me 100 crores for 50 years to be repaid, zero interest, we'll embrace it, right? Practically it's free money. So if you take these are all transfers to states. 25.6 lakh crores is transferred to states this year. That constitutes 54.6% of the total revenues of Government of India, tax and non-tax. So somehow the political arguments we make, very silly arguments, they are silly. They are devoid of facts. I want you to understand. We can go deeper, but there's no time. So first is fiscal prudence, without which the poor are the ones who are going to hurt most. Because if government fails, we all go to our gated communities and villas and all that. Nandan's wife, my friend Rohini, she made a very beautiful comment. She said, the rich of India are seceding from the country. They create their own islands and they're unbothered, unaffected by what happens to the rest of the people because of governance failure. Now, that's okay for some time, but ultimately, we are a part of this country. We cannot isolate ourselves from the rot that is setting into the country because of government's failure in infrastructure, in regulation, in rule of law, in 100 other things. The second thing that we need to do, zero cost, not a rupee. I'm a very thrifty guy. I don't believe in saying, give me 10 lakh crores, 1 lakh crores. No. Assume that money is in short supply or there's no money available. Education, school education. Many of our pundits say we have to spend 6% GDP on school education, on education. With due respect, they're talking without any understanding of the issue. I would not like to say anything harsher. United States spends about 3.8% of GDP on school education. But United States educates 92% of all the kids in the country in government schools. And they give a reasonable quality education, not good enough for America, but definitely they're way, way, way above us. Britain spends 3.3% of GDP on school education. 95% of the kids are in government schools. We spend 3.6% of GDP on school education. 60% of the children are in government schools. And the outcomes are appallingly bad, one of the worst in the world. So education, particularly school education, because that is the key. Without good quality school education and the skills, how can there be productive workers? We can do it easily without spending 1 rupee extra. Andhra Pradesh is spending 1,15,000 rupees per child going to government school per year. 1,15,000 rupees. If you are not aware, we think that government schools, where is the money, bichare, no, it's not true. Telangana is spending about 90,000 rupees per child. AP spends more because they have something called Ammavadi, etc. Other states spend, Maharashtra spends about 1 lakh of rupees per child, other states 80, 90,000, some states 60,000 depending on the per capita income, etc. These are not small sums. The teacher-student ratios are extremely good. Our secondary schools have 18 kids, 1 teacher, average. Government schools I'm talking about. 16 kids, 1 teacher. And there are, in India, 13,000 schools with teachers. There are 39,000 teachers without a single student. True numbers. When I raised this issue in the assembly in the Andhra Pradesh state in 2009 or 2010, it was much worse. And the whole assembly, despite the Telangana agitation and disruption, it was shocked. For 4.5 hours, we debated that. So money is not the issue in education, particularly school education. It's the quality, utilizing resources better and quality. Many of us grew up in villages. As I told you, I went to a village school, Telugu medium. The particular response of the government shocked me. The government said, henceforth, India will not participate in PISA survey. Real story. 2009, the survey was conducted in which India was participant. 16 years since then, we buried our head in sand. This does not do well. We can easily set it right because our kids are intelligent. They work very hard. Our parents sacrifice enormously. The poorest parents, rickshaw pullers, vegetable vendors, they're willing to spend disproportionate sums to give their children an opportunity, a head start. Our government is spending a lot of money contrary to public perception. Our society values education. When somebody gets selected, when you said, no, some silly examination, I got through and I got a rank, you all applauded. You thought it was a great achievement. I was feeling embarrassed. We have so much of adulation. Educational success we revere in this country. Across all castes, regions, religions, languages. It's a very common for all of us in this country. Angatlo anne unnai. Allu notlo senu unnadu. We have all the factors which are right, except that the fellows whose duty it is to impart education don't know a thing about it. They pretend. When the demand side is very strong, all you need to do is create the right kind of incentives by creating the right kind of goal. If the examination you can score very highly by copying and by mugging up, we do copying, we mug up. If you can do well only if you understand and if you apply the knowledge, we'll also figure out somehow. The market, the parents, the schools, the administrators, the whole system will somehow figure out. By merely changing the examination system, making it sensible, stress-free, not based on why is there so much of stress, you have to mug up. Memory. Again, there's no time to go into detail. I'm just going to give a glimpse of it. So education. Third is healthcare. Healthcare, we are the lowest spender in all civilized world from the government. We spend 1.1, 1.2% of GDP from the government. Britain spends about 10%. Almost every rich Western country spends about 9 to 10%, including United States. Only Singapore spends about 3.5% GDP from the government, but gives the world's best healthcare. Private sector, the people spend another 3.2%. Indian government spends only 1.1, 1.2% of GDP. That government mostly is state expenditure. When I say Indian, not union government, but governments in India. Union government's share in that is only 30%. 70% is by the states. We can't spend too much money. We don't have too much money. If you spend just about 0.5 to 0.6% GDP extra, that too not overnight, over 2-3 years you stagger it. 1 year, 1 lakh crores we gave tax exemptions. Without thinking, right? This recent budget. I'm saying 1 lakh crores over a period of 3 years, add 30,000 crores every year. Over 3 years' time, we make it 1 lakh crores extra, but do it wisely. There's a way of doing it with primary care. Again, there's no time to go into details. Each of these issues, I've been working for years with intense depth and fighting very hard. So none of it is casual observation. Everything is backed by evidence and logic and global practices. You can radically improve the outcomes in healthcare. Right now, just to give an idea of the link between healthcare and poverty and inequality. 5.5 crore Indians, 55 million Indians, are descending into poverty every year because of healthcare failure. Just imagine, 5.5 crore people descending into poverty. That means on the 1st of January, they were not poor by our standards, by our measurement. But within the year, they descend into poverty because of inadequate access to healthcare. Either because they're not able to earn, because of lost time and wages, or they're forced to borrow for the health expenditure. So either way, they're becoming poor. 5.5 crores, almost the population of Britain or France, every year. Every year. The largest cause of indebtedness in India for the poor is healthcare challenges. There's a measure called Fiscal disability adjusted life years. That means how many years have you lost on account of ill health? For every 1 lakh population, we are losing 49,000 years. That means almost half the productive life of human beings in this country is lost because of ill health. About 15,000-20,000 cannot be reduced because age, no. After a certain age, you cannot. So you don't take it 49 as a bad thing. 15, you assume that's the minimum. But you can easily reduce it by another 30,000-35,000 years. That means 1/3 of the life can be made productive. 1/3. Productivity is equal to prosperity. So healthcare, low-hanging fruit. Education, zero cost. Fiscal management, zero cost. You only have to improve the way you manage things. Healthcare, a bit. I'm arguing for about 0.5% of GDP. Slowly increasing, you can't do it overnight. And doing it wisely. The fourth issue, I talked about rural-urban issues. Distant migration to big cities of the poor people with low skills and low wages is a disaster. It's an unmitigated disaster. Just remember COVID time, what happened? When more than 4 or 5 or 6, some people say 6 crore people had to go back to the villages, the pain and the suffering they endured, it's seared in our memory. What happens to a low-income, low-wage person coming from a distant village to a big city? There's no housing. In a ramshackle place, several people share in insanitary conditions. Somehow they survive. Because we are a warm country, it doesn't kill you, but terrible lives. You have to commute 15, 20 kilometers each way to work. One day you have no work, you starve. One day you fall sick, it's a catastrophe. We are forcing them to migrate to distant big cities because there are no economic opportunities locally. All you need to do is allow small towns to grow. You don't have to spend much money from the government. All you need is town planning and transport. Just these two things. Because of the advantages that are now available as opposed to 30, 40 years ago, television, electricity, digital technology, mobile phone, many of these jobs can be local. Let me give you a few examples. There's a place called Achyutapuram in the erstwhile Vizag district, very close to Anakapalli. A company called Brandix, a Sri Lankan garment factory. They established there. 22,000 women are employed there. Every person within a radius of 40, 50 kilometers, there's not a woman in those villages. If she wants to work, there's not a woman who is unemployed there. There's a place called Sulurpet, a company called Apache, a Taiwanese company. 15,000 people in leather garments, leather goods, they're employing. A company called Doctors in a village called Kavuru, a small village, it's not even a small town. They established a medical transcription related company in that village. First they did it as altruism, our village, let's do something. They employed 200 people. Now they're expanding it by another 500 workers because they find it more profitable than in Hyderabad. The costs are lower, productivity is higher, profits are greater. Our imagination must not be merely Hyderabad. Hyderabad should grow. Chennai should grow. We are proud of our cities. But they must be also in situ urbanization. Within 10-15 kilometers, if you simply have town planning, public transport available, proper roads. You know what the complaints of these companies are? The other day my team went to Sulurpet to find out what's happening. There are 3 complaints they made, 3 requests they made. One, the roads, we are sending buses to ferry workers every day. The roads are bad, can you improve? Is that too much to ask of a government? Giving 15,000 people employment and paying taxes? 2, we want to give health care to these workers. We will build our own hospital. We require a bit of space. Just give us 2-3 acres of land. 3, because so many people are now working, there are some other vagabonds and drunkards, they're creating problems. Can there be a police station, at least a police outpost? What are the big things here? This is real case. Sulurpet, that's why I'm giving examples, names and examples. You can verify. So there's so much that can happen in this country. You cannot always look at the big things. They are necessary. AI is necessary. Blockchain technology is necessary. I don't understand what it means, but it doesn't matter. All these are necessary. I'm all in favor. But remember, all of software in India employs only how many people? Anybody has an idea? The total computer industry in India, I'm the architect of the high-tech city, so I'm all in favor of it. But that's not the only solution. Anybody has an idea how many people are employed in the computer sector in India? Total in India is 5.6 million, 56 lakhs. They constitute 1% of the total workforce of India. You do that, you expand it, make it bigger, I'm all for you. But the real challenge is the balance 50 crore people. Giving them an opportunity, giving them a decent wage. A 15,000-20,000 wage in a small town is equal to 40,000 in Hyderabad. And more dignity, and their khandan is there, their friends are there, their network is there. Small town development. You don't have to spend much money. Once you do minimal things required, the transport infrastructure and town planning, private sector will come in, sites, services, schools, colleges, hospitals, everything will come automatically from private sector. Finally, we must look at employment generation and skill promotion as the central challenges of India. Employment means investment. If you treat every investor like dirt, potentially he's a sinner, he's a bad fellow. That is our assumption in this country with the old pseudo-socialist notions. If you insult them, then you will not get productivity, you will not get employment, you will not come out of poverty, you will not create equality of opportunity. Our labor laws, now look at, I'll give you one example and conclude with this. I've already overshot my time very considerably, my apologies for that. China is 5 times our GDP. Their per capita income also is 5 times because population is roughly equal. They are now at $19 trillion, at least 4.5 times our GDP, 4.5 times our GDP. $19 trillion, we are at about $4 trillion, give or take, dollar appreciation, etc. And China is at a much higher level of value chain. We all understand that. But at the low level, garment industry, to take as an example, they produce as much cotton as we do. There's more poverty in India. There are more willing hands here. China manufactures and exports $325 billion worth of garments, giving tens of millions of people employment, 325 billion. The total export of India is 36 billion garments. Where is 325? Where is 36? When we are poorer, when we need more employment at the low level with some decent wage, why are you not allowing it? Because of your land policies or labor policies. You have terrible labor policies which are anti-labor, anti-employment in the name of protecting the labor. So just reimagine and bring linkages between agriculture and industry as far as practicable at the local level. The broader point I'm making is, A, we desperately need to create conditions for the bulk of the poor in India to have a better life. But through the sweat of their brow, through hard work, through skills, through opportunity, through enhanced incomes and dignity. And B, it's eminently feasible. You don't have to spend money. You just have to have common sense vision and do a few right things. If building a minimal infrastructure is a big issue, big ask, then the governments have no rationale to exist. And all of us with voice, the OGA, the enlightened citizens of India, the more fortunate people in India who understand the right and wrong, we need to collectively raise voice beyond parties. I don't care which party, it doesn't matter. Let me conclude with this. One day, several times, not once, on several occasions I told a very prominent leader, one of the most prominent leaders, the other party leader will never become president of your party. 95% of the rest are interchangeable. So what is the big thing we're talking about? All this market segmentation and then this publicity is all tamasha. Let's bury the hatchet. Parties are not that important. They're incredibly important in political management. But in terms of ideas, it's all a lie. There's nothing much to distinguish them. It's the same people, right? You all know. They're your friends. Oftentimes when I meet some politicians, I don't normally pay attention to what's happening on a daily basis. Though I live here, I completely disconnect myself from the daily. I don't watch television, I don't read newspapers except to do Sudoku and other puzzles, etc. I am unaware. So occasionally when I encounter an airport or something, a prominent politician, I honestly ask them, which party do you belong to now? No. And very shamefacedly they tell me, sir, now I'm in so-and-so party. Which I could not have imagined 5 or 10 years ago because they were completely opposed to that party or leadership. So parties are irrelevant. We have to shape up. We have a priceless opportunity, which only modernity gives. And I hope that we will look at evidence and logic and the best practices and make the best of the opportunities available and transform our country the way we deserve and the way we need to. I wish you all the very best. Thank you.